The Department of Transportation recently shared a PSA aimed at passengers to help reduce the number of incidents involving unruly passengers. Hi, I'm Morgan, and this is an aviation discussion. I'm not going to share any sources for this video because I want it to be a discussion. I think it's a good thing that the Department of Transportation shared a PSA in response to the 400% increase in unruly passengers over the past several years. I think it's a good thing because it's providing an opportunity for people to discuss different ways that we can, as a whole, reduce the number of unruly passenger incidents. And I thought maybe there are some ways that we could reduce it as a whole that could include all parties and stakeholders involved, and I wanted to share those and get feedback. I've seen a couple of follow-up interviews regarding unruly passengers, especially when those passengers have been recorded during the incident. In some of those cases, when the passengers were interviewed after, they were incredibly shocked at their own behavior. And in some of those cases, the passengers noted that they were nervous to fly. And being nervous to fly is something that is to be expected because about 40% of people have some type of anxiety surrounding flying. One of the first things that people do if they've tried other things to calm their anxiety around flying is to take medications or use substances to calm their nerves, because in their mind, those substances or those medications in other situations and scenarios make them feel more calm. But in the environment of an airport and an airplane, it seems to at times have the opposite effect and make them more unruly or hostile or anxious. So when you identify a problem and you go, okay, this thing is happening at a higher rate, you have to try different things to try to solve that problem, which is one of the things that the Department of Transportation did when they shared this PSA. And we will see with time whether or not this has an impact, but something that I think could help reduce some of these incidents of unruly passengers would be identifying those passengers who are very nervous flyers. When you check in for your flight online, you have to check a box that indicates you are aware of the items that you can and cannot travel with, and maybe a pilot program by airlines to identify nervous flyers where you have a question within that check-in process that is, somehow worded to grasp whether or not you have anxiety around flying or you're a nervous flyer. And this isn't to say that it is an airline's responsibility to manage the emotions and nerves and anxiety of passengers and not to put that unruly behavior by individuals onto an airline. It's just to say that maybe something like this may help in identifying who those passengers are who do at times become unruly. It could help the staff of the airline during check-in, at the gate, and boarding, and even the flight attendants on the plane know who may be experiencing some type of distress. And that's where my second part comes in. Another issue that I have noticed in some of these follow-up interviews with unruly passengers is that they will cite some circumstance that is going on in their life that has led to extreme stress or distress. That would be something like you got a phone call and someone that you love across the country is in the hospital and you don't know if they're going to make it. That is a situation that I have been in before. I got a phone call that my father was not doing well, and I live in Arizona and he lived in South Carolina. And I had to immediately go to the airport, and I was visibly distressed. But the way that I was showing the distress was through crying, and I think the people around me noticed that something bad was going on, and not everyone reacts that way when they're in that type of situation. So maybe an additional flag when you are checking in. It doesn't necessarily have to be when you purchase the ticket, but when you are checking in for your flight within 24 hours or sometimes a couple of hours, to let the airline know that you are experiencing a situation that is putting you at high stress. Once again, this is not me stating that the issue is something that airlines have to solve. This is something that we have to come together to solve. And I think the more things that we try out to see the outcomes of, the better. The point of this video was that this was a good thing that this PSA was shared, because it opens up an opportunity for people to discuss what do we think can be done to decrease the number of unruly passengers. And the Transportation Secretary took a step to address that by releasing a PSA directed at passengers. I think the real solution is going to come from collecting input and trying different things and finding out what works. My approach and the direction I was going with these two ideas was to come up with a solution that is very low cost for anyone involved, whether it's passengers, airlines, Department of Transportation, whoever, by just adding 2 different boxes that you check when you check in, and also lets passengers who are in distress or anxious know that someone knows what they're going through or sees them, or they feel seen or heard. And I think that may have some type of impact. And obviously, I don't know if it will. It could have the opposite impact. So that's why this is a discussion. What do you think? What do you think would help decrease unruly passenger events? And I would like to hear every perspective. So whether you're a passenger, whether you're a pilot, a flight attendant, or someone who works for an airline and witnesses all of these events in the airport or in the air.